Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. It's Hila here from Saturday Night Stitch. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are. Today's post, I'm going to answer a question I get asked a lot. Being somebody who sews with Burda style magazines, a lot of people ask me whether it's easy to sew with Burda style magazines. And I decided to answer this question in a podcast format. So, this question is quite tough for me to answer because I am a committed lifelong learner who genuinely believes that anybody can learn anything with the right mindset and strategy. The concept of a growth mindset was popularized by Carol S. Dweck in her book called Mindset: The New Psychology of Success. And she says that people with a growth mindset believe that abilities can be developed through dedication, and this view creates a love of learning. So when it comes to whether something or anything is easy or not, then the answer is almost always it's relative. It's all relative when you think about it. People who don't sew think that I am an incredibly talented person, like I'm a Mozart-like person who was born with an innate ability to sew. This, by the way, is what's called a fixed mindset, but I'm not even close to that truth. In the ecosystem of the sewing world, I am not a Mozart. I'm just a person who found expression in sewing and dancing. So if I had to say what it's relative to, I'd say that there is a spectrum within the sewing sphere. Okay, so bear with me here. Most people who buy ready-to-wear are at one end of the spectrum and they stay there very happily, which is perfectly fine. And then as you move further along the spectrum, you get to the point where you are aware of sewing, and then you probably do sew. And you have everything you need to be able to sew with Burda as far as I'm concerned. As long as you can actually sew a straight stitch, you can do it. And so long as you understand patterns, cutting and pinning and stitching straight, then absolutely, you can sew with Burda. So again, this comes into the learning curve. It comes into play here because the Burda style approach to sewing is completely different to what you may have started off with. If you started sewing with Burda style, then you're good and you're sorted, lucky you. But for most people, myself included, their entry point into sewing is either with the big four sewing patterns, your Vogue, McCall's, Butterick, Simplicity, or more increasingly, in the past few years, indie sewing patterns, independent sewing patterns. And this is critical, because Burda style assumes that if you are buying the magazine or their patterns, you kind of know what you're doing for the most part. You know how to sew a zip or how to hem or how to ease-stitch, etc. And I think that it's this assumption that allows Burda to produce some very unique and interesting designs on a consistent basis, as they don't have to worry about holding your hand and gently guiding you through the sewing process. The exception, of course, is the featured sewing lessons that you find in each issue. To me, this makes intuitive sense, as the learning curve means that you'll probably learn to install a zipper, hopefully without any instructions, after a few installations. It's similar to cooking, whereby each recipe assumes you know how to boil an egg or boil the pasta or how to finely chop an onion. So in that regards, Burda works from the basic assumption that you are okay with basic techniques like easing, gathering, zipper insertion, buttonholes. Now contrast that to indie sewing patterns that give you plenty of resources, sew-alongs and sew-along videos to guide you and hold your hand throughout the process. As a case in point, look at a fabric recommendation for a Burda style pattern in a magazine, right? You're lucky if you've got more than 2 lines of the fabric recommendation, and you kind of have to base it on what the styling picture looks like. But if you check out a blog post from some indie sewing patterns, especially in the last couple of years, you may have up to 2 separate blog posts with more than 500 words and loads of pictures talking about just the fabric selection, which is the first part. Now, this is all fine and good as you expand and explore your repertoire. So going back to the spectrum and the relativity of sewing, then the answer to whether sewing with Burda is easy, well, it's all relative to your why you are, where at the point you are on the spectrum. Okay, let me explain this, right? So if you are at the beginning point and you've just started sewing and you continue to sew with beginner-friendly patterns, your why may be because you don't like moving outside of the comfort zone, where it is comfortable because it's nice and easy and you know exactly what you're doing. So your why is that I like it here and it fulfills you, and that's fine. And so if someone were to ask you if sewing a coat is easy at that particular point in your sewing spectrum or in your sewing journey, you might say, oh gosh, no, that is incredibly hard. If you find yourself looking beyond your point and beginning to wonder and ponder if, sewing those jeans might be doable, it's a fairly strong indication that you are perhaps ready to take off the training wheels and go off-road. But like with everything new to learn, the first step is to figure out your why and then come up with a strategy to take action. And if you haven't got your why nailed down, you won't continue to try with it. And without it, you will quit the moment that you hit that pesky learning curve. But I'd like you to think of all the other intricate skills that you have mastered. Think of driving a car or working the espresso machine or your coffee machine. Those things are doable. So sewing with Burda style patterns is absolutely doable. But start with your why. Nowadays, there is a sense that instant gratification is the thing. So you get all of these books or patterns that are being sold, promising you an instant fit and a fantastic wardrobe in just one go. But the truth is, it takes longer than that. There is no one instant easy fix that's going to make you quickly learn something without the actual doing. And the doing part, the action part, that can be hard. It can be challenging and it requires a lot of activation energy. And the only place where you can get your activation energy is by having a clear understanding of why you want to do that. So for me personally, with Burda, I love sewing with Burda because I find their designs to be fashion forward for the most part. And they're a great bargain. An annual subscription costs me only £80, but I'm getting a minimum of 10 sewing patterns from each magazine. So that's about 120 sewing patterns a year for £80. And when I contrast that to how much a Vogue pattern costs me here in the UK, it's a no-brainer. It offers the best bang for my money. I also like the fact that the instructions are quite scant at best and that I can really focus so completely on trying to get that garment sewn up that I can completely disconnect from my head and from my daily worries. It allows me to have hyper focus and super focus. And so I really like that, about the Burda patterns. Plus the drafting is excellent. I know that when I sew with them, I'm getting a well-fitting garment. So for me, this is my why. So for example, somebody else, their why might just be that, they like the design and they kind of want to see what the big deal is. There are a lot of people within the sewing sphere that talk about Burda magazines. So you might be curious, and so you might want to check it out. And I don't know about you guys, but personally, I like trying out things that I'm constantly curious about because it gets rid of the shoulds in my head and that creates a lot more mental space. Okay, so once you've nailed down your why, your motivation, that's going to be the source of your activation energy to get past the difficult bits. Okay? And you're going to need some strategies to help you with that pesky learning curve, because once you hit that, you're going to feel like quitting. But you have to make a commitment, number one, to go long. A mistake a lot of people make is they give up before you give it enough time. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's important to know when to quit, but you gotta give it time. And number two, embrace monotasking. I'm gonna say this again because this is incredibly important. Embrace monotasking. Multitasking is not a thing. You're switch tasking when you think you're multitasking, and there's been plenty of studies that show that it is ineffective. It causes attention fragmentation. Just embrace monotasking. Get yourself a timer, set it for 10-15 minutes, and allow yourself 100% hyper focus on what you are doing, especially when you're learning something new. And number three, repeat, and I'll repeat it again, repeat. Learning something new requires frequency of and persistent repetition in performing the same skill. Things won't always turn out how you want them to. There will be feelings of frustrations, but I look at sewing mistakes as productive failures because I always take something from them that makes my next project all that much more better. Learning a new way of doing anything requires dedication of energy at first, but at some point it becomes fun, and that's when the magic begins. And by the way, relatively speaking, Burda's style isn't even the most challenging sewing patterns that I have come across. Murphy patterns that are based in Italy don't even have any instructions or any line drawings. All you have are these hyper-stylized, unrealistically proportioned, but very pretty drawings to go by. You don't even really get a fabric recommendation. The patterns are pre-cut, and you really do have to know your stuff. And I have a few Murphy patterns, and they definitely really stretch you outside your comfort zone. It's all about perspective, people. The long and short of it is that I truly believe that anybody who knows how to cut a pattern and sew a straight line on a sewing machine can absolutely sew with Burda style patterns. They're definitely doable. It's just a completely different approach to sewing that you might not be used to. But if you could learn how to sew in the first place, you can absolutely learn how to sew with Burda style patterns and open yourself up to an entirely new world of sewing with sewing magazines. And trust me, guys, as somebody who is a big fan of sewing magazines, it is amazing and loads of fun. So that's it, guys. I really hope that you've enjoyed this podcast. And if you did, do give it a big thumbs up down below. If you haven't already, do subscribe for new sewing related videos every week. And I'd also like to invite you to pop over to my blog and say hello. I do post there on a regular basis. And if you have some questions that you want me to go in depth into, normally my blog is the place that I do that sort of stuff. I also have a Facebook page. The link is in the description box down below. I hope you can pop over there and say hello. And until I see you next time, guys, a happy sewing. Bye.